All right, guys, this is going to be Star Defender Section 1. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to make a new project. So just make sure you have Construct 3 open, you're logged in with your account. The free edition should not be listed there. If you're having issues with it still saying free edition, make sure you let me know and I can set you up with the full version, okay? If this says free edition and guest, you want to click on it and make sure you log in with your Construct account first, okay? Then you're going to click New Project. The name is going to be your first name and last name, and then the word Star Defender, and don't do any spaces. So I'm just going to label mine like this. And then I'm just going to put a little extra at the end for me to label it. Viewport size, change that to 1280 by 720, and then you can click create, okay? Then what we're going to do is we're just going to make a couple of quick edits, and then we're going to get our first proper save in. So layouts on the right, you have layout 1. You're going to right click it and you're going to rename it, and you're going to call it game. Now, if you're on a Chromebook and you don't have a mouse, you actually don't have a right click button, okay? But you can still right click. So if you're on a Chromebook and you're using the touchpad, to right click, you have to just tap 2 fingers at the same time on the touchpad or on the click button. So just do 2 fingers at once. It's not a double click. You're just touching it with 2 fingers at the same time, and that'll be a right click, okay? Event sheet 1, we're going to rename that ES game. So rename ES game. Okay, just like that. Once you've got those 2 things labeled, we are going to go ahead and do our first save. So what we're going to do is at the top, you're going to click menu, you're going to click project, save as, and we're going to do cloud save. And we only have to do this for the first save, okay? Now you're going to see a box up here that says service. You want to make sure it's on Google Drive. And then if it asks you to choose an email, make sure you do your school email account. And then once you're in, it should look like mine where you just see a bunch of files in here. And then what you're going to do is make sure that this is labeled properly and you're going to click save. So I'm going to click save. Okay, and it should be in. Okay, now I want to show you how to open your game when you want to work on it again later. So we'll just pretend we're starting over. So I'm going to close the game after I saved it. Okay, so when you're back on this screen, let's say it's tomorrow and you're going to start working on the game. What you're going to do is you're going to click cloud. And then you are going to, it should log in automatically right to your Google Drive, but if not, just make sure this says Google Drive, and if it asks you for an email, pick your school email. And then the construct files are always at the bottom. They'll say .c3p. And then you just want to find the Star Defender game. So mine's right here. And I got it open back up, okay? The next thing we're going to do is we're going to set our layout size to match the viewport. So we had done 1280 by 720. So if you highlight the game layout, the size up here in the upper left, you want to make sure that that is also 1280 by 720. Okay, so that should be good there. The next thing is now that we have saved it properly in our cloud, it's registered there. So from now on, when you want to save, you just have to click this save button right here. And if it turns black like this, that means it's not updated. You need to save. So I can click that. And now my game is currently up to date. If this is grayed out, it means that your game is saved and it's up to date. Now, I do recommend that some of you might want to actually set up auto saving because by default, it will not auto save. Okay. So if you want to set up auto save and have it automatically save every few minutes, just go to menu and then go to settings. And then down in settings, scroll down to the save and backup section. The default save location, you want it to be cloud, so it saves right to your Google Drive. And then you just have to check this to periodically back up the project. Then it's going to ask how often. So by default, it's going to be every 10 minutes. It's up to you how often you want to back up. I would say maybe every 2 to 5 minutes is probably better. The longer your time is here, the more you're at risk of losing, right? So if you set this to 10 minutes, you potentially could work like 9.5 minutes and then your game could crash or your power goes out and you would lose that 9.5 minutes of work. Whereas if you put the interval at 5 minutes, the most you could lose is like just under 5 minutes of work, right? So if you want to lose less work, I would say a smaller time is better. At the same time, you might not want it to back up like every 1 minute because it'll constantly be saving all the time and kind of lagging you out. So I don't know. To me, 5 minutes is a pretty nice number, but you pick what you want. If you don't want to, some people don't like the auto saving because you might want to control when something saves in case you make an edit that like completely crashes the game and you don't want to save that. That could be a risk that you take there. So it's up to you. So if you don't want it to, you don't have to go in and do this. It's going to be up to you. Okay. And then you just close that window when you're done. All right, so that's how you autosave. So now what we're going to do is we're going to start by making our first sprite right away. Also, don't forget on the screen, if you want to see the whole layout, if you just click on the screen once, you do Control minus to zoom out and Control plus to zoom in. So I usually like to be able to zoom out most of the way and see what I can, see the entire screen. All right, so I'm going to double click on the middle of the screen and I'm going to add a sprite and it's going to be called player. Click on the screen to add it. Now, this is where I'm going to deviate from the presentation a little bit. In the presentation, they actually tell you to draw your own ship. I'm going to say that that's optional. If you want to draw your own ship, you can. Otherwise, we have the assets already available that you could just put those in. And what they do in the presentation is later on, they have you put the assets in anyways. So what I'm going to say is this. You can draw your own if you want to. And then you can decide if you do draw your own, you can keep your custom drawn ones in the final. You wouldn't have to load in the assets. Or you can draw one and then use the assets like the presentation tells you. Or you can do what I'm going to do here and just load in the assets and not even worry about drawing your own. If you do want to draw your own, it is kind of fun. It just takes time. It's just a matter of if you feel like you have time and want to do that. But it is a lot of fun. In the presentation, they tell you to just draw it right in this box, which is fine. But we have an online drawing program called Pascal that's really, really awesome. And I have a link to it in the resources. So if you do want to draw your own, I recommend you go to Pascal and do that. And I do have a tutorial video on that in the resources tab if you want to check that out. Okay. So I'm just going to load in the sprite. So I'm going to click load. And you just have to navigate. For you, it's probably in your downloads folder. I have mine kind of somewhere else. So I'm just going to navigate to that really quickly. Yeah. And then I have Star Defender assets. All right. So when you get into the assets, it should look something like this. And you can see in here, we already have the player sprite right here. So I'm just going to load that in. And I'm going to zoom in on it so I can see it. Okay. All right. So there's my player sprite already loaded in. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it some behavior. So I'm just going to close that, have it on the screen. We want the player ship to just move left and right. So I'm going to go ahead and add a behavior. And the behavior is actually going to be 8 directions. Okay. So by default, if I run it, my player can just move like all the way around, but he also like rotates really weird and funny. So for this game, we just want the character to move left and right, and they're always going to face forward. So if I go to my properties here, under 8 direction, I can choose how many directions I want right here. So instead of 8, I'm going to choose just left and right. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the ship at a very specific starting position. You don't have to do yours exactly like this, but this is just kind of what they recommend in the presentation. So I'm going to scroll to the top with my player ship selected, and I'm going to click on position here in the upper left, and I'm going to go 600 by 650 and press enter. Okay. So that's the recommended starting position. We're just kind of lower on the screen and we're centered. Okay. The other thing is on the ship, there is in the 8 directions, after we set it to left and right, it says set angle smooth. What that means is that the ship is going to rotate in a smooth way towards the angle you're pressing. We don't want to do that. We want the ship to just be anchored and stay facing forward. So we're going to turn the set angle to no. So right here on the ship's property, set angle, turn that to no. And then if I run it, I should just be able to move left and right. Yep, and he's not angling different, so we're good to go there. Okay, we got the ship in. Okay. The other thing we're going to do on our ship really quick, so I just want to make sure my collision polygon looks good. I think that's fine. If you want it to be a bounding box, you could. Like you could right click it and do set to bounding box. But I think the polygon it had was fine also. Doesn't really matter. If you are worried about this empty space being hit, you could just right click and we could do guess polygon. And that is probably fine like that. So you don't really need to do anything with the polygon there if you don't want to. All right, so we've got that. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to make a bullet for the ship to shoot. So I'm going to double click and make a sprite. And I'm going to call it player bullet, all one word, no spaces. Okay, like that. Insert, click on screen. Once again, the presentation tells you to resize and draw your own bullet. I'm just going to load in the bullet sprite, but if you want to draw your own, that's perfectly fine. And we are going to use player bullet right here. Okay, so I've got that. Now it looks funny, it's just because I'm zoomed out. So I'm just going to zoom in a bunch so I can actually see it. Now this one has a pretty bad collision polygon. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to see if I can crop it down a little bit. And I'm going to right click and I'm going to set this to bounding box. I'm just going to do that for my collision polygon. Okay, so just make sure you have the collision polygon selected here where my cursor is. You'll get the little blue box or whatever. Make sure you zoom in. I click plus at the top here to zoom in. And then you right click in the middle and do set the bounding box. So I would get that collision set up for the bullet. Okay. I think that's good there. The bullet's pretty small. Okay. It's 11 by 8. Yeah, it's pretty small, but that's, we want it to be a little bit smaller. It's actually kind of hard for me to select. So I might like drag a box just to select it. But we want to have this bullet off screen somewhere. So I'm just going to move it off to the side. If you need to zoom in, you can press Control plus and zoom in, and that'll help you grab it. But just get that bullet kind of pushed off to the side there. Okay. All right. And then the bullet. So I'm going to try to click on it here. We need bullet behavior. So I'm going to highlight it and click behavior. The other thing too is if you're having trouble clicking this sprite because it's so small, you can click it from up here in the project window, and that's a lot easier. Okay. So player bullet. And what we're going to do is we're going to go behaviors, and we're going to give it 2 behaviors. We need to give it bullet, obviously, because it's a bullet, right? And then we're going to give it another one called destroy outside of layout, which is this one here. That just means anytime the bullet leaves the layout, it'll get destroyed automatically. I don't even have to put in code for it. So normally, when we have objects like bullets off to the side like this, we would have to do a bullet destroy on start of layout. But if we have this behavior on it, we don't have to do it because it's going to auto get destroyed as soon as the game loads. Okay. All right. So then on the bullet, you want to go to the properties on the left. And the really important thing is you need to turn the set angle off. Okay. Make sure that that is turned off. That's pretty important. Okay. And then we're simply going to add a quick event so that I can shoot the bullets. So I'm going to double click and we're going to add the keyboard to our game. Remember, the keyboard isn't a visual object that you see. It's just something that'll be on the side here. And then it now allows me to do code with it. Okay, so let's go ahead and add an event for it just to make it so my ship can shoot. So I'm going to go to my ES game, double click to make an event. We're going to do keyboard on key pressed. Right here, we're going to choose spacebar. Click OK, click done. So I say on space pressed, we want the player to spawn another object. And the player is going to spawn a bullet, player bullet. Okay. Right now, we'll just leave the layer at 0 because we don't have other layers made yet. And we'll leave image point 0 because we haven't done anything with image points yet. Okay. Now, the issue is when we spawn a bullet, the default angle of motion is 0. So it's going to fly to the right. So we want the bullets to fly straight up. So we're going to set the angle of motion to 270. Okay. And really quick, if I just jump to Google Classroom here, at the top in the resources tab, in case you're doing angle of motion, I have an angle of motion chart here, and you can click on it and you'll see it'll tell you what direction for the angles. So 270 is up, so that's where we want to go here. So we're going to add an action here after we spawn the bullet. We're going to do player bullet, and we're going to do set angle of motion. Now remember, you want to do angle of motion, not set angle. They're very different things. Set angle means you're actually just rotating the object's angle. Angle of motion means it's the actual bullet direction. And see it has the bullet next to it. So we want the bullet direction to be 270. So we do angle of motion, and then we type 270. Okay. So then really quick, I would save if you haven't saved yet, or if you didn't put on autosave. Then we're going to go ahead and run it. And then I should be able to move left and right. And you see when I shoot the bullets, they go straight up. Okay. Now you can see the angle there is kind of funny. Oh, you know what? My bad. I made a note on there and I misunderstood my note. So on the player bullet, you saw the bullets came out sideways. That's because we turned set angle off. We actually do want that set angle on. So that's my bad. So click player bullet on the right. And then the set angle, we do want that on, because what that does is it makes the actual rotated angle of the object match the angle of motion, which we do actually want that to match up. So since we put the angle of motion to 270, having the set angle on means that the bullet's actual angle will rotate to 270. So it'll actually be facing the right way. So now you'll see that when I shoot, the bullets are facing straight up. Okay, so that was a good learning lesson there, right? So that you understand what that set angle does in the properties. So that's good. Okay, so we've got that set up. Um, now we are going to go back to our game layout and let's add a behavior to our player. So we're going to go to the player, add another behavior. There's another behavior we need. So we want the player to be bound to layout, because right now if I run the game, I can just like float off the screen and we don't want that. You could decide if you wanted your player to wrap. That could be another option where like your player goes and then pops out on the other side. That could add a different element to your game. But otherwise, we just want to do bound to layout. So if I add a behavior and I give them bound to layout, basically it's like putting a wall on the sides. The player is not allowed to leave the layout. So they will get stopped if they try to leave the layout. So that's going to force our player to stay within this area. Okay, and then the bullet, I already gave the bullet that behavior we wanted for that. Now we're going to make an enemy so that we can shoot at an enemy. So I'm going to double click and make a sprite. And we'll call it enemy. Okay. Insert, click on the screen. Once again, presentation says draw your own enemy. You can do that if you want. Otherwise, we can just load one in. So for the enemy, we actually have 3 different animation frames we're going to use. So in the animation frame window, I'm going to right click and I'm going to import frames from files because I'm going to import multiple pictures. And I'm going to click on enemy 1, hold control and click on enemy 2 and 3. Now you're going to see these 3 frames are going to load in here. What you're going to do is delete frame 0. And I'm going to just zoom in here so we can kind of see these here. So the purpose of this is we actually don't want this to animate. Basically, we want 3 different enemy types that are all going to function similarly, but they're going to have some different functions that they do. Um, but we want to program them under the same object so we don't have to code multiple things in. So because the enemies for the most part are going to act the same, we just want to change the appearance. We're going to do this method instead. And with the different appearances, we can still change some of the functionality of them as well. And it's really going to make our code more efficient. So what you're going to want to do is right now, I'll just show you real quick. So see how my enemy's on the screen? If I run it, it's going to animate. See how it just animated to the third enemy? We don't want that. We want him to just stick at whatever enemy we choose, whatever frame we choose. So for animation 1, we need to set the speed to 0. Okay, that's going to make it so it won't animate. So then, just as an example, I can hold control and I can multiply these enemies out. And then if I highlight one of these enemies, I can go to the properties on the left and I can change the frame number. So if I make this one frame 1 and I make this one frame, 2, you can see they all have different appearances. And because I put the animation speed to 0, they're going to stay in that frame. So it's basically a way to create different looks or appearances for our enemies. Okay. All right. Making sure I have everything. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the first enemy or just pick one of these. And we're going to set the position to 75, 75. That's going to be the important starting position of our enemies. So we'll put that first one there. And then I'll just put the other ones kind of up here next to it. We could be specific and put a grid on and all of that and really line them up nice. If you're someone that wants these lined up nice, do not spend a lot of time doing that now. We are actually going to code in later to make the enemies spawn in themselves. And we're going to make the code in a way that it's going to adjust them in a row perfectly for us. So don't waste your time with that now. It's okay if they're uneven right now. Okay. All right. Now, on our enemies, I do want to check the collision polygon and they look okay. So if you load in the pre-made sprites, you can just leave the collision box. If you drew your own, though, you're probably going to have to go and do your own collision box or set to bounding box. Okay. Now we're going to make a bullet for the enemy. So I'm going to double click. I'm going to make a sprite. And I'm going to call it enemy bullet. Okay. And on this enemy bullet, we are just going to load in the enemy sprite. Once again, you could draw your own, but we're going to just use the enemy bullet, and I'll just do enemy bullet 1. Okay. What'll happen is later on, there will be another frame for another bullet, but you can do that later. So I'm going to just crop this, and I'm going to right click. So I zoomed in on this because it's really small sprite. But I'm going to right click in the middle here and set to bounding box, and then I should be good to go there with the enemy bullet. Okay, perfect. And then this little enemy bullet, I'm going to just make a box and select it because it's super teeny. And I'm just going to see it's really hard, so I'm going to have to zoom in. So I'm going to do Control Plus and zoom in a little bit here just so I can get this guy. And I'm going to try to grab him and pull him off to the side. All right, there we go. Also, if you feel like these bullets are too small, like you can make them bigger. So if I go to resize this, let's see how big this is. 12 by 7, yeah, it's pretty small. So I can maybe just go like 20 by 20 just to, well, no, 20 by, hold on a second, cancel. I'm going to do keep aspect ratio, and I'm going to change this to 20, and then it should auto change the other part. So I can just like buff up the size a little bit. Yeah, and that makes it a little bit easier to click on. So if you want to beef up the size of these, you could. Totally optional. Don't have to if you don't want to. Resize, keep aspect ratio. Let's make this 120 also. Let's make them a little bit bigger. That way they're just easier to click on. But the size we had was probably the appropriate size. But if you want them a little bit bigger, that's totally understandable. Okay. All right. So on the enemy bullet, so make sure you click on the enemy bullet. We need to give that behaviors as well. So click behavior, add new behavior bullet. We need bullet and destroy outside layout. Okay, perfect. And the enemy bullet, we do want set angle on, which it is, so you don't have to change that. So we're good to go there. So you don't really have to do any other settings there. Okay. You want to make sure you have multiple enemies on the screen. So if you have like 3 of them or so, like I do, that's fine. If you want to put like 10 enemies on there, you can if you just want to practice and try it out. Okay. Then what we want to do, so if we run it right now, you can see the enemies just sit there. We haven't told them to do anything yet. I can shoot my bullets, which is good. Okay, but they don't interact with anything yet, so we'll get there. Okay, so the enemies, what we want them to do is turn and rotate and target you. And this is going to be like the archer from the flip game, if you remember that. So we're going to give them turret behavior. So I'm just going to click on any enemy. I'm going to go behavior, add new behavior, and we're going to add turret. Okay. And then what we're going to do is we need to change the turret range because right now 300 pixels, they're too far away to actually detect the player. So what I recommend is you want to click enemy on the right in the project window. That way it selects all of them because these properties will be unique for each of these individually. So we want to make them all the same. So click enemy from the project window on the right. They should all get highlighted. We're going to change the range to 1469. I know that seems like a really weird random number. In the presentation, they show you how to actually like use the Pythagorean theorem to calculate the distance from the player. And they do all this math and they come up with 469 is the correct number to detect your range. So that's why that's such a weird number. So, but you could just make it bigger. Like if you did 1500, that would be fine because they can still detect you, right? Okay. Rate of fire is how often they're going to shoot. We'll leave that at 1 for now. But what you could do is you could give each of these a different rate of fire and make them more difficult. So like this first guy's rate of fire might be 1. This third guy's rate of fire might be 2. And then maybe this middle guy, his rate of fire might be 0.5. Maybe he'll shoot really fast. Okay. So you could make all of your enemies unique and give them different rates of fire if you wanted to. So then what we're going to do is we're going to tell the enemy when to spawn a bullet. Okay. So we're going to go to our event sheet. We're going to add an event for the enemy. And we're going to do something called on shoot. Now this is a turret command. And what on shoot means is whenever their rate of fire triggers, they will shoot. So for each of those enemies, when we change their rate of fire, that's what triggers this. So that one enemy, this will trigger after 2 seconds. Another enemy will trigger after 1. Another enemy is going to trigger after a half a second. So when their shoot triggers, we add an action for the enemy. We're going to spawn another object, and they're going to spawn the enemy bullet. Okay. We'll leave layer and image point for now. We'll change that later. Okay, so we're going to spawn the enemy bullet. So now if I run it, well, actually, they're still not going to do anything yet. Yeah, because we haven't actually set up the turret targeting yet, so they're still not going to shoot. So in order for them to shoot, we have to make an event that will tell them to start shooting. So I'm going to add a new event, and we're going to do an on start of layout, and we want the enemy to target the player right away. So I'm going to do system on start. Okay, so on start of layout, we're going to do an action for the enemy, and we are going to type in turret. And what we want to do is we want to do add object to target. Okay. Some people choose acquire target by mistake. They seem very similar, but they're actually quite different. So what acquire target means is it'll target that thing like one time in that instance, but if it loses the target, it will not retarget it. It'll only do it at that moment. Whereas if we say add object to target, it will continuously try to retarget that object if it loses it. So it'll always target constantly. So think of it as like an every tick for targeting in a way. So add object to target. We want the enemy to target the player at all times. So as long as the player is within that range of 1469, the enemy will try to target the player. Okay. So then let's set up some collisions. So we want to know what happens when the enemy bullet hits the player. So I'm going to add an event for enemy bullet on collision with another object. Let's see, on collision with the player. Done. For now, we're just going to destroy the player. So we're going to add an action for player, and we're going to do destroy. I'm pretty sure this game in the end doesn't use a health system. It just uses a one-hit kill, and you have a certain number of lives. On your own, if you wanted to implement a health system, you certainly could do that. And it would be very similar to Asteroid Destroyer. Okay. Also, when the bullet hits the player, we need the enemy bullet to get destroyed as well. So add action for enemy bullet, destroy. Okay. And then we want to do the player bullet hitting the enemy. So we want to do the opposite. So add an event for the player bullet on collision with another object with the enemy. Done. Then what we're going to do is we're going to do enemy destroy and player bullet destroy. So enemy destroy. Add another action for player bullet destroy. Okay. So we've got that set up. Now what we're going to do if I run the game, so you're going to notice a couple things that are weird. One is the enemy bullets are coming out of the middle of their body. And if the player bullet, you can see my bullets are coming out of the middle of the body. So that's kind of a problem. So we want the bullets to come out of the appropriate spot. Okay. So we're going to add some image points to the enemy and to the player. Okay. Now, in the presentation, they actually tell you to change the origin, but I don't like that because then the enemies rotate on a weird axis and they don't look natural. I would want the enemies to rotate from the center. So I'm going to leave the origin in the middle. We're going to add an additional image point. So this is going to be kind of a thing that's unique to my version of this video. So I'm going to click on the image point button, which is this one right here. Over here where it says origin, I'm going to right click below it and add a new image point. And I'm going to get image point 1. And that image point 1, I'm going to put right on the tip here of the spaceship. And on each ship, I can put that image point where I want to. What I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to go back onto this first ship. I'm going to right-click image point 1, and I'm going to say apply to whole animation. And so now, all of these guys should have an image point 1 right on the tip there. And actually, the location for them is perfect. Okay? So then I'm going to close that, and then I'm going to also add an image point 1 to the player. So I'm going to double-click my player. So I just did that from the project window on the right side. Okay? Make sure you're on the image point button down here. Right click in this open area, add new image point. Image point 1, put it right on the tip here. Close that. Then if I go to the events that spawn the bullet, so right here, it says spawn the bullet. So I'm going to double click the player spawn bullet event, and I'm going to change it to image point 1. Okay. Same thing with the enemy. Spawn enemy bullet. I'm going to say image point 1 instead. Okay. Now when we run it, the bullets are going to look a little bit better and come from the front of the ships. That looks a lot better to me. And the enemies are rotating on like the correct axis, okay? Otherwise, what happens instead of spinning from that middle axis, it's on the tip and like it looks like the backs are waving around. It doesn't look right. I like this much better. Okay. All right. So I did that. Okay, so then what you'd want to do is I would just want you practicing maybe doing several rows. You don't have to do a ton of enemies, but why don't you see if you can line up your enemies and do an entire row of each type? So remember how to do this is if you hold control on an enemy, you can just drag other enemies out like this. And then if you didn't do it earlier, you would just pick on one of the enemies and change the initial frame down here. And that's how you get the different looks. So what I would do is like what I had is make one. So I have 3 enemies to start, make each one a different frame so they all look different, and then have each one start a row, and then just hold control and then drag them out. Because if you go and make a big long row and they all look the same, then you have to go and manually like change all of their frame numbers. Whereas this way, when you copy it, it just keeps the frame number that you had. And you can decide how many you want to put here in this row. I'll just go a little bit like this maybe. And once again, do not worry about lining these up perfect. Right now, we're basically just practicing and kind of getting it started. The code is going to change later where these enemies won't even be here, and we're going to spawn them in through the code actually. Okay. All right, so we have that. And then what you could do is you could have like each row be a different turret rate, which we already did. So if you did that earlier, if you had your initial 3 and you gave them each a different rate of fire, when you spawn them now, this entire row's got the same rate of fire. And then this one's got a different rate of fire, but that whole row will have the same. So if I run it, you should see the rows kind of attacking at different rates here. Yep, so you see that middle row is attacking a little bit faster than the other ones. And that's just that you know you can adjust the difficulty on different enemies. Okay. All right. So then, if you guys remember on here, we set the animation speed to 0 so it wouldn't animate. I'm just going to show you another way you could fix that problem. So if I go to my ES game, in the presentation, they actually have you keep the animation speed at 5. And what they do is they actually have an event to control that instead. So I'm just going to show you that just so you know. And you can put it there if you want to. And it doesn't hurt to have it both ways. But all they did was on start of layout. Whoops, not on space press. Um, on start of layout, which I have here. And I'm going to do this right now. I like my on start of layout at the top. So I grabbed it by the green arrow and I'm just moving it up to the top. But on start of layout, they just have you add an action for enemy. And then under animation, they just tell you to stop animations. So it just, they have this event and that's how they solve the problem. But for me, I'm just always in the habit of when I'm using separate frames for separate looks or different objects, I just am in the habit of turning the animation speed to 0. That's the way I like to do it. Okay, but that's another way there. All right. So then what we need, and we're almost done by the way with this first section, we need a variable to track how many enemies are on the screen. So we're going to make a global variable. So just right click out here, add global variable. We're going to call it enemies. And we're going to have the initial value at 27. Okay. And actually, since we're going to do 27, you'll want to make sure you have 27 spaceships out here. So we'll just count them up quick. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 times 3 is 21. So we need to add what, 6 more? So we're just going to add, I'm just going to add 2 more ships to each row. There we go. So yeah, go ahead and make sure there's 27 ships there. And then we're going to set that variable to 27. Once again, this is all going to change later, but we're just going to kind of follow along for now. Then what we're going to do is we're going to go to when the player bullet hits the enemy, which is here. When the enemy gets destroyed, we are going to subtract 1 from the variable so we can track it properly. So we're going to add an action, system, subtract from enemies 1. Okay, so we're going to do that. And then what we're going to do is we're going to make it so if we destroy all the enemies that it will restart the layout for now. Normally we're going to, later on, we're going to change this so that it's a wave-based system, but for now we're just going to have it restart. So we're going to make a sub-event onto this player bullet collision with enemy. So add, right-click, and then add sub-event. And then basically we want to do system, compare variable, and if enemies equals 0, Then we're going to add an action and we're going to do system restart. Okay, so make sure that this is sub-evented underneath the bullet on collision with enemy. So basically when we hit the enemy, we'll destroy it, subtract 1 from the variable. Then if the variable happens to equal 0, then we'll restart at that time. So for now, that's going to be like our victory. Okay. Um, and then what we're going to do to make sure when this restarts that that global variable resets, we're just going to add an action to our on start system set value. And we're going to set enemies to back to 27 every time it restarts. Okay. Then the other thing that we're going to do is we're going to make it so that the player can easily restart, because right now we don't have a game over, right? So if they kill you, so I'll show you really quick here. I should be able to shoot and like start destroying these guys. Okay, but if they kill me, I'm just stuck. There's nothing I can do. So you can on your keyboard press F5 to restart. That's just a default that it's programmed to do. But in the presentation, they tell you to just set up a keyboard event to do it. So if you want to do that, we can add an event for keyboard and just do on key pressed. Let's see, on key pressed, and they have you do enter. So you'd have to click, and enter isn't one that you can press. You have to use the drop down to get enter. So, or if you want to do like R or something, whatever you want to be your restart button, just do that. And then we'll just copy this restart layout and put it down here. So now when I run the game, if I just press enter, it'll restart. Okay. Or you can do F5. When you do F5, what F5 does is it reloads the window. So it takes a little bit longer. So if you do the key code, it goes a lot faster. If I just say on key pressed enter, you can see I can restart it really, really fast. So that's a little bit better for quicker restarts. All right, so that should be it for section 1.